Gabriel Sterling could feel everyone's emotions as physical pain. Anger burned like acid, fear tasted like metal, and love? Love was agony beyond description. That's why he'd built walls around his heart and empire. Until he met Emma, the one woman whose touch brought silence instead of screaming. But when his ex-fiancée returns with threats that could destroy everything, Gabriel must choose: protect his secret empire or fight for the only woman who's ever made him feel human.
Welcome to another episode of Ever After Romance audiobook. This story is an original creation for entertainment only.
Chapter 1: Gabriel's Prison. The mahogany boardroom table stretched endlessly before Gabriel Sterling, its polished surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights that seemed designed to amplify his suffering. Every breath felt calculated, every movement measured as he sat rigidly at the head of the table, his charcoal Armani suit serving as armor against the world. The hostile takeover attempt has escalated, his lead attorney droned. But Gabriel barely heard the words. Instead, he felt them, waves of anxiety rolling off the man like acid rain against his skin. The synesthetic curse that had plagued him since childhood transformed every emotion in the room into physical agony. Fear tasted metallic. Greed felt like needles. Anger burned like molten lava coursing through his veins. "Mr. Sterling?" The voice cut through his concentration. Board member Harrison extended his hand for the customary handshake, and Gabriel's stomach clenched. Nevertheless, he reached forward, their palms connecting in what should have been a simple gesture of professional courtesy. Lightning struck. Harrison's desperation crashed into Gabriel like a tsunami, sharp, overwhelming, drowning him in another man's terror. The sensation of drowning, of gasping for air that wouldn't come, flooded Gabriel's nervous system. His fingers trembled imperceptibly as he released the handshake, reaching subtly for the prescription bottle in his jacket pocket. "The quarterly reports show promising growth," Gabriel managed, his voice steady despite the chaos raging within his hypersensitive mind. Years of practice had taught him to mask the torment, to project strength when every handshake felt like touching a live wire. However, as the meeting progressed, each unavoidable contact chipped away at his carefully constructed facade. Mrs. Chen's congratulatory pat on his shoulder felt like ice shards piercing his spine. Director Williams's enthusiastic handshake transmitted waves of artificial cheerfulness that made Gabriel's teeth ache. Furthermore, the worst was yet to come. "Sir," his assistant Marcus approached cautiously, tablet in hand. "The Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala is tonight. Your attendance is expected." Gabriel's jaw tightened. The gala meant crowds, endless introductions, countless touches from strangers whose emotions would assault him like 1,000 different poisons. "Cancel it?" "I'm afraid that's impossible, sir. You're the keynote speaker." The prescription bottle felt heavier in his pocket. Gabriel had built an empire worth billions, commanded respect from world leaders, controlled markets with a single decision. Yet he remained powerless against his own nervous system, a prisoner in his own body. As the boardroom finally emptied, Gabriel stood alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the glittering city lights below. Each light represented thousands of people, thousands of emotions he couldn't bear to feel. The irony wasn't lost on him. The most successful man in the city was also the most isolated. Tonight's gala loomed ahead like a beautiful nightmare, another evening in his personal hell. Gabriel Sterling had everything money could buy, except the one thing he craved most: peace. Chapter 2: Emma's Struggle. The ancient radiator coughed and wheezed in the corner of Emma Chen's cramped studio apartment, its mechanical death rattle competing with the steady hum of her grandmother's oxygen concentrator. At 2 a.m, exhaustion clung to Emma's shoulders like a heavy cloak, yet sleep remained elusive. Her calloused hands moved across the canvas with desperate precision, each brushstroke a prayer whispered in pigment and hope. "Nai needs her medication refilled tomorrow," Emma signed to herself in the dim light, a habit developed from years of thinking in visual language. The stack of medical bills on her rickety kitchen table seemed to grow taller each day. their red-stamped warnings glaring like angry eyes in the lamplight. Moreover, the eviction notice tucked beneath them felt like a death sentence written in legal jargon. Emma's reflection in the paint-stained mirror revealed the toll of working 3 jobs: dark circles beneath her expressive brown eyes, paint smudges on her cheekbones, and hair pulled back in a messy bun secured with a paintbrush. The girl who had once dreamed of gallery openings and art critics praising her work now measured success in hourly wages and paid bills. The elegant invitation lying beside her easel mocked her circumstances. The Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala promised an evening of champagne, culture, and networking opportunities that could change an artist's life. Unfortunately, the entry fee alone cost more than Emma earned in a month of dawn shifts at the coffee shop, afternoon hours cleaning offices, and evening work at the diner. Nevertheless, something about tonight felt different, electric with possibility. Emma's fingertips traced the embossed lettering of the invitation, imagining herself in that world of silk gowns and sparkling conversation. Her latest painting, a turbulent seascape that gradually transformed into serene waters, seemed to pulse with its own inner light, as if aware of its potential destiny. "One night to dream," she whispered aloud in her soft, carefully modulated voice, the words feeling foreign after hours of silence. Her speech therapy sessions from childhood had taught her to control her volume, but in the solitude of her apartment, speaking felt like a luxury she rarely indulged. The thrift store dress hanging on her closet door wasn't designer silk, but its midnight blue fabric would have to suffice. Emma had spent her last $20 on it, choosing between the dress and groceries. Her grandmother's gentle smile when Emma had shown her the invitation made the decision easy. As Emma finally set down her paintbrush, her fingers ached from the night's work, but her heart raced with unprecedented anticipation. Tonight she would step into a world where art mattered, where beauty was valued, where dreams might actually come true. Little did she know that across the city, another soul was preparing for the same evening with equal trepidation, carrying his own burden of isolation and desperate hope for something he couldn't name. The city held its breath, waiting for 2 lonely hearts to collide. Chapter 3: The Silent Touch. The Hartwell Foundation's ballroom sparkled with crystalline chandeliers that cast dancing rainbows across marble floors, yet Gabriel Sterling felt as though he were walking through a minefield. Each step toward the crowd meant inevitable contact, inevitable pain. The symphony of emotions surrounding him created a cacophony, his synesthetic mind translated into physical torment. Jealousy felt like broken glass, ambition tasted of copper pennies, and superficial charm burned like dry ice against his skin. "Gabriel, darling," Mrs. Pemberton's voice cut through the classical music as she approached with outstretched arms, her fake smile radiating waves of social climbing desperation that made Gabriel's temples throb. He expertly sidestepped her embrace, offering instead a polite nod. "Mrs. Pemberton, lovely to see you." Meanwhile, across the room, Emma Chen stood frozen in the gallery's art exhibition space, her midnight blue thrift store dress making her feel simultaneously invisible and exposed. The paintings surrounding her commanded prices that could pay her rent for years, yet none possessed the raw emotion she poured into her own work. Her trained eye caught the subtle techniques, the masterful brushstrokes, but her artist's heart yearned for something more authentic. That's when she saw it, or rather, felt it. The painting in the corner seemed to call to her, its swirling blues and grays depicting a storm at sea that gradually transformed into peaceful waters. Something about the piece resonated with her own artistic vision, though she couldn't quite place why. Gabriel, desperate to escape another round of obligatory handshakes, had retreated to the same quiet corner. He found himself drawn to the seascape, its emotional progression from chaos to tranquility, speaking to something deep within his tortured soul. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" The voice was soft, melodic, with the careful enunciation of someone who had worked hard to perfect their speech. Gabriel turned, and his world tilted on its axis. The woman beside him was studying the painting with an intensity that matched his own, her dark eyes reflecting the gallery's soft lighting. She was lovely, but not in the polished, artificial way of the other guests. Her beauty felt genuine, unguarded, like finding a wildflower in a garden of perfect roses. "Yes," he managed, his usual eloquence abandoning him. "It captures something essential." Emma turned toward him, and Gabriel noticed the subtle way she positioned herself to better read his lips. The realization struck him gently. She was deaf. Yet somehow, this knowledge didn't create the usual barrier he expected. Instead, it felt like discovering they shared a secret language of isolation. "I'm Emma," she said, extending her hand naturally, without the calculated agenda he sensed in every other interaction tonight. Gabriel hesitated for a heartbeat, then reached for her outstretched palm. Their fingers touched and the world stopped breathing. Nothing. For the first time in 23 years, Gabriel felt absolutely, blissfully nothing. No emotional overflow, no synesthetic assault, no waves of foreign feelings crashing against his consciousness. Emma's touch was like stepping into a soundproof room after living beside a construction site. The silence was so profound, it was almost musical. "Gabriel," he whispered, his voice rough with wonder. He couldn't bring himself to release her hand, afraid the miraculous quiet would shatter. Emma noticed his reaction, the way his entire body seemed to relax at their contact. Most people pulled away quickly, either from discomfort with her deafness or simple social convention. But Gabriel held on as if her touch were an anchor in a storm. "Are you all right?" she asked, concern flickering across her features. Before Gabriel could respond, Emma's face paled. The exhaustion of working 16-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination, finally caught up with her. The room began to spin, colors bleeding together like watercolors in rain. "I think I need to—" But her words dissolved as consciousness slipped away like sand through fingers. Gabriel's reflexes, honed by years of hypervigilance, kicked in instantly. He caught Emma as she fell, lifting her against his chest with a tenderness that surprised them both. For the first time in his adult life, he held another person without pain, without the overwhelming assault of their emotions flooding his system. Instead, he felt only her, warm, peaceful, silent in the most beautiful way imaginable. "When did you last eat?" he murmured against her hair, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Emma's eyes fluttered open to find herself cradled in the arms of a stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. Chapter 4. The Rescue Proposal. The leather interior of Gabriel's Bentley enveloped them in intimate darkness as the city light streaked past the tinted windows. Emma sat curled in the passenger seat, still dizzy from her collapse, while Gabriel's driver navigated the late-night streets with professional discretion. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was profound, laden with unspoken questions and impossible possibilities. Gabriel kept glancing at Emma, marveling at how her presence transformed his usually claustrophobic world. The confines of the car, which typically felt suffocating when shared with others, now felt like a sanctuary. Her proximity should have triggered his synesthetic hypersensitivity, but instead, he felt remarkably, miraculously calm. "You fainted," he said carefully, ensuring she could see his lips in the dim light. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." Emma studied his face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading between the lines of lip movements and facial expressions. Something in his careful pronunciation told her he was adapting his speech for her benefit, a kindness she rarely encountered from strangers. "I'm fine," she protested, though her pale complexion suggested otherwise. "I should get home. My grandmother—" "When did you last eat?" Gabriel interrupted gently, his question revealing more concern than a stranger should possess. The truth was embarrassing. Emma had skipped meals for 3 days, stretching her meager grocery budget to cover her grandmother's prescription copays. But admitting such vulnerability to this obviously wealthy man felt impossible. "I had something earlier," she lied, avoiding his penetrating gaze. Gabriel's penthouse elevator rose silently through floors of steel and glass. carrying them toward a world Emma had only imagined in magazines. When the doors opened to reveal his private residence, she gasped audibly. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering cityscape like a living painting, while modern furniture arranged with mathematical precision created an atmosphere of sophisticated minimalism. "Sit," Gabriel commanded softly, guiding her to a plush sofa that probably cost more than her yearly rent. "I'll get you something to eat." Emma watched him move through his pristine kitchen with surprising domesticity, preparing a simple meal with careful attention to her needs. The contradiction fascinated her. This powerful man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, tenderly caring for a stranger who had collapsed in his arms. Moreover, the way he touched things intrigued her. Gabriel handled objects with deliberate precision, as if physical contact required conscious effort. When he accidentally brushed her fingers while handing her a cup of tea, she noticed how he paused, studying their joined hands with wonder. "You're different," Emma observed, her artist's intuition picking up subtleties others might miss. Gabriel's laugh held no humor. "That's an understatement." As Emma ate, color gradually returned to her cheeks, and Gabriel found himself sharing more than he'd intended. He spoke of his synesthetic condition in careful, clinical terms, watching her face for signs of pity or fear. Instead, Emma listened with the focused attention of someone who understood isolation. "I work 3 jobs," she confessed eventually. "Coffee shop mornings, cleaning offices afternoons, diner evenings. My grandmother needs constant medical care, and insurance doesn't cover everything." The vulnerability in her admission struck Gabriel like lightning. Here was someone who understood struggle, who fought daily battles against circumstances beyond her control. Yet unlike the grasping desperation he sensed in others, Emma's determination felt pure, untainted by greed or manipulation. An impossible idea began forming in Gabriel's mind. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words escaping before rational thought could intervene. Emma's teacup rattled against its saucer. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's purely business," Gabriel continued, his pulse racing with possibilities. "You need financial security, health insurance for your grandmother. I need—" He paused, unwilling to admit how desperately he needed her calming presence. "I need a wife for social appearances." Emma stared at him as if he'd suggested they fly to the moon. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." Gabriel leaned forward, his gray eyes intense with conviction. 1-year contract. $500,000 upfront, full medical coverage for your family, and a comfortable living situation. The offer hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Emma's practical mind warred with every instinct screaming that this was insane, dangerous, too good to be true. "Why me?" she whispered. Gabriel's answer came from somewhere deeper than logic. "Because you're the first person whose touch doesn't hurt." Emma's hand trembled as she set down her teacup. Her grandmother's medical bills, the eviction notice, the constant exhaustion of working 3 jobs, all of it could disappear with one word. "Yes," she breathed. Chapter 5. New world, new rules. Morning sunlight flooded Gabriel's penthouse through walls of pristine glass, transforming the minimalist space into a cathedral of golden light. Emma woke slowly, luxuriously, in the softest bed she'd ever experienced, her body finally free from the constant ache of exhaustion. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back like a wave. She was married, to a stranger, to Gabriel Sterling. The simple civil ceremony yesterday felt surreal, conducted in a judge's chambers with only Marcus, Gabriel's assistant, as witness. Emma's plain dress and Gabriel's dark suit, their careful distance during the brief exchange of vows, the surprising warmth in his gray eyes when he slipped the platinum band onto her finger. It all seemed like an elaborate dream. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling." Gabriel's voice carried from the kitchen, carefully pitched so she could hear him approaching. Emma's heart stuttered at the title. Mrs. Sterling. The words felt foreign on her tongue, like wearing someone else's clothes. Gabriel appeared in the bedroom doorway carrying a breakfast tray, his usually immaculate appearance softer in the morning light. His charcoal hair was mussed, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and Emma caught herself staring at the strong column of his throat. "I wasn't sure what you preferred," he said, setting the tray carefully on the bed, "so I made several options." The feast before her would have fed Emma for a week in her old life. Fresh strawberries, fluffy pancakes, perfectly scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and coffee that smelled like heaven. Her stomach growled audibly, betraying how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal. "This is incredible," Emma signed automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, teach me," Gabriel interrupted softly. "What you just said. Show me." Emma's breath caught. No one had ever asked to learn sign language for her before. She demonstrated the signs slowly. "This is incredible." And Gabriel attempted to mirror her movements with careful concentration. His fingers were long, elegant, made for precision. When he formed the words clumsily but earnestly, Emma felt something warm unfurling in her chest. "I've arranged for you to have access to everything," Gabriel said as Emma ate. "Credit cards, car service, anything you need. Also, I had Marcus install visual doorbells and notification systems throughout the penthouse." Emma paused mid-bite. "You did that overnight?" "I made some calls," Gabriel said simply, but Emma caught the flush creeping up his neck. He'd spent hours researching accommodations for deaf individuals, learning about assistive technologies, ensuring her comfort in ways no one ever had before. Furthermore, when Gabriel's phone buzzed with morning meeting reminders, Emma noticed how his entire posture tensed. The relaxed man who'd brought her breakfast transformed back into the rigid CEO, armor sliding into place. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "But Emma, if you need anything, Marcus will—" "Can I come with you?" The words tumbled out before Emma could stop them. Gabriel froze. "To my office? I promise I won't be in the way. I'm just curious about your world." The vulnerability in her request undid something in Gabriel's carefully constructed defenses. When was the last time someone had been curious about him rather than what he could provide? "Of course," he said. An hour later, Emma sat in Gabriel's chrome and glass office, sketching him during a board meeting with quick, confident strokes. She'd positioned herself where she could see his face, watching how he commanded the room with quiet authority, how other executives hung on his every word. But Emma also noticed what others missed, the subtle tension in Gabriel's shoulders when someone leaned too close, the way he strategically positioned himself to minimize physical contact, the almost imperceptible relief when meetings ended. During a brief recess, Emma approached his desk and placed her hand over his. Gabriel's entire body relaxed at the contact, his breathing deepening as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. "Better?" she asked. Gabriel's smile was answer enough. When the board members returned, Emma caught the speculative glances directed her way, the whispered conversations just beyond her ability to lip read. She heard fragments. Gold digger, fortune hunter, charity case. The words stung more than they should have. After all, wasn't she exactly what they accused her of being? She had married Gabriel for money, for security, for escape from her desperate circumstances. Yet, as she watched Gabriel navigate another handshake with barely concealed discomfort, as she felt the genuine kindness in his gestures toward her, Emma began to wonder if their business arrangement might be evolving into something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. Chapter 6. Learning to Communicate. The media storm hit Sterling Industries like a financial tsunami. By noon, paparazzi had gathered outside the building like a pack of hungry wolves, their telephoto lenses trained on every entrance. Headlines screamed across digital platforms. "Mystery wife," "Who is Gabriel Sterling's secret bride?" and "Billionaire's surprise marriage shocks Wall Street." Emma stood at Gabriel's office window, watching the chaos below with growing unease. She'd never experienced this level of scrutiny, never been the subject of such intense speculation. The attention felt suffocating, invasive, like being trapped in a fishbowl while predators circled outside. "They'll lose interest eventually," Gabriel said from behind his desk, though his tight jawline suggested he was equally disturbed by the media frenzy. "It's just news cycle gossip." Emma turned to study his profile, noting the carefully controlled tension radiating from his powerful frame. Gabriel Sterling, master of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, was struggling to manage this particular crisis because it involved something he couldn't control or negotiate: genuine human emotion. Moreover, Emma was beginning to understand that beneath Gabriel's commanding exterior lay a man as vulnerable as she was, perhaps more so. "Is this normal for you?" Emma asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Not like this," Gabriel admitted. "I've always kept my private life completely separate from business. The board is concerned about the implications." As if summoned by his words, the office door burst open without warning. Board member Harrison strode in with the entitled confidence of someone accustomed to having his interruptions welcomed. "Gabriel, we need to discuss damage control." Harrison stopped mid-sentence when he noticed Emma, his expression shifting to barely concealed disdain. "I wasn't aware you had company." "My wife," Gabriel said simply, rising to his feet with protective instincts Emma found surprisingly touching. Harrison's cold gaze swept over Emma with the calculating assessment of someone appraising livestock. "Charming," he said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "Perhaps we could speak privately, Gabriel. This concerns sensitive business matters." Emma stood gracefully, recognizing the dismissal for what it was. "I'll wait outside." But as she moved toward the door, she caught Harrison's words to Gabriel. "Really, Gabriel? A gold-digging charity case? Even you could have done better than some desperate—" Gabriel's voice cut like a blade through steel. "Finish that sentence, Harrison, and you'll find yourself looking for new employment." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she closed the office door behind her. She hadn't needed to hear the rest of Harrison's assessment to understand his meaning. In his eyes, and likely in the eyes of everyone else, she was exactly what he'd implied. A fortune hunter who'd trapped a wealthy man through manipulation or desperation. The worst part wasn't he partially right? Emma found herself in Gabriel's private conference room, staring at the city sprawling below while her mind churned with doubt. She'd married Gabriel for money, for security, for escape from crushing poverty. The fact that she was beginning to genuinely care for him, beginning to crave his gentle touches and thoughtful gestures, didn't change the fundamental transaction at the heart of their arrangement. "Emma?" Gabriel's voice drew her from her spiraling thoughts. He'd entered quietly, his expression concerned. "Are you all right?" "Am I what they say I am?" The question escaped before Emma could stop it. "A gold digger? A charity case?" Gabriel crossed the room in 3 quick strides, taking her face gently between his palms. The contact sent that familiar wave of peace through his system, but more importantly, it grounded them both in the present moment. "You're brave," he said firmly. "You're talented. You're compassionate enough to sacrifice your pride for someone you love. And you're the only person in the world whose touch doesn't cause me pain." Emma's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. "But I did marry you for money." "And I married you because I was desperate for peace," Gabriel replied honestly. "Does that make our marriage less real? Less valuable?" Before Emma could answer, Gabriel's phone buzzed insistently. Marcus's voice came through the speaker with unusual urgency. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your fiancée." Gabriel's face went ashen. "That's impossible." "She's quite insistent, sir. Victoria Blackwood?" The name hit Gabriel like a physical blow. Emma felt his hands tremble against her face before he pulled away, his walls slamming back into place with almost audible force. "Who is Victoria?" Emma asked, though the sick feeling in her stomach suggested she already knew. Gabriel's silence spoke volumes. The honeymoon phase of their strange marriage was about to face its first real test, and Emma had the terrifying suspicion that their fragile connection might not survive the storm that was coming. Outside the conference room windows, storm clouds gathered over the city like an omen of the chaos about to unfold in their carefully constructed world. Chapter 7. Walls Coming Down. The private art studio Gabriel had created for Emma was a masterpiece of thoughtful design, flooded with north-facing light and equipped with professional-grade supplies she'd only dreamed of owning. Canvas stretched across custom easels, tubes of paint arranged like a rainbow of possibilities, brushes of every conceivable size and texture waiting for her touch. Yet Emma stood frozen in the center of it all, her hands trembling not with artistic excitement, but with the memory of Victoria Blackwood's cold beauty, her possessive familiarity with Gabriel, the way she'd looked at Emma like an interloper in a story that had been written long before Emma's arrival. "You haven't touched anything," Gabriel observed from the doorway, his voice soft with concern. Emma turned to find him studying her with those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see through every defense she'd ever constructed. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and somehow managed to look both devastatingly handsome and heartbreakingly vulnerable. "It's beautiful," Emma said honestly. "Too beautiful. I'm afraid I'll ruin it." Gabriel stepped into the studio, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. The click of the latch felt like a promise of privacy, of safety, of truths about to be spoken. "Tell me about Victoria," Emma said before she could lose her courage. Gabriel's entire body went rigid, as if her name were a physical blow. He moved to the windows, staring out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Victoria is my former fiancée," he said finally. "We were engaged 3 years ago." "What happened?" Gabriel was quiet for so long Emma thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds never properly healed. "She couldn't handle my condition," he said simply. "The synesthesia, the touch sensitivity, the way crowds overwhelmed me. She tried at first, but eventually, she decided I was too complicated, too damaged to build a life with." Emma's heart clenched at the carefully neutral tone that couldn't quite hide his pain. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Gabriel turned back to her, his expression fierce with a truth that took Emma's breath away. "If she hadn't left, I never would have found you." The words hung between them like a bridge Emma was afraid to cross. This wasn't part of their business arrangement, this growing tenderness, this sense that they were becoming something real and precious, and terrifyingly fragile. "Gabriel," Emma whispered. "I need to tell you something else," Gabriel continued, his voice rough with emotion. "The synesthesia. It started when I was 7, the night our house caught fire." Emma's breath caught. She could see him struggling with the memory, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "My mother didn't make it out," Gabriel continued. "My father, he blamed me. Said if I'd been braver, faster, less of a coward, I could have saved her. The guilt, the trauma, it rewired my brain somehow. Every emotion became physical pain, every touch a reminder of what I'd failed to do." Tears Emma had been holding back since Victoria's arrival finally spilled over. Without thinking, she crossed the room and took Gabriel's face in her hands, just as he'd done for her earlier. "You were a child," she said firmly. "None of that was your fault." Gabriel's eyes closed at her touch, his breathing deepening as the familiar peace washed over him. "You're the first person who's ever made the noise stop," he murmured against her palms. "Gabriel, I need to tell you something too," Emma said. Her secret felt smaller in comparison, but no less significant to their understanding of each other. "I wasn't born deaf." Gabriel's eyes opened, focusing on her with complete attention. "I was 8 when I got meningitis," Emma continued. "The hearing loss was gradual at first, then complete. My father, he couldn't handle having an imperfect daughter. He left, and my mother spent years dragging me to specialist after specialist, convinced that if she just found the right doctor, the right treatment, I could be fixed. Emma. I learned to read lips to make her happy, went to speech therapy until I could pass for hearing in short conversations. But it was never enough. I was always going to be the daughter who wasn't quite right, who needed accommodations, who made life harder. Gabriel's hands covered hers where they rested against his cheeks. And now? Now I'm the wife you married for convenience, Emma said, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart. Another accommodation, another way to make your life easier. Is that what you think? Gabriel's voice was rough with emotion. That you're just convenient? Before Emma could answer, Gabriel leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was nothing like the polite peck they'd shared during their wedding ceremony. This was desperate, hungry, full of weeks of suppressed longing and the desperate need to communicate feelings that words couldn't contain. Gabriel's synesthetic sensitivity transformed Emma's desire into something he could taste, warm honey and golden light, overwhelming in the most beautiful way possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "You're not my accommodation, Emma," he whispered. "You're my home." Emma's response was barely audible, but Gabriel felt the words as much as heard them. "I love you too." The admission hung between them like a confession, dangerous and precious and completely contrary to the business arrangement that had brought them together. They were supposed to be playing roles, maintaining distance, protecting their hearts from exactly this kind of vulnerability. Instead, they were falling hopelessly, irrevocably in love. Chapter 8. Perfect Moment. The Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala sparkled with the same opulent grandeur as the night Gabriel and Emma first met. But this time, everything was different. Emma walked through the glittering crowd on Gabriel's arm, no longer the desperate artist in a thrift store dress, but a confident woman in midnight blue silk that complemented her husband's charcoal tuxedo perfectly. More importantly, she was no longer alone. Gabriel moved through the social obligations with unprecedented ease, his usual tension replaced by an almost visible contentment. Emma's presence beside him created a buffer against the overwhelming sensory assault that typically made these events torture. When someone clasped his shoulder in greeting, when handshakes became unavoidable, Gabriel found he could endure the brief discomfort because he knew Emma's calming touch was only moments away. "You look radiant tonight, Mrs. Sterling," whispered Counselor Martinez, taking Emma's hand with practiced charm. Emma smiled graciously, though she noticed how Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly at another man touching his wife. The possessive reaction sent a thrill through her that she tried to suppress. This was supposed to be a business arrangement after all. But the way Gabriel looked at her tonight suggested their relationship had evolved far beyond the parameters of any contract. "Shall we dance?" Gabriel asked when the orchestra began a slow waltz, his voice pitched perfectly for her to read his lips despite the ambient noise. Emma's heart fluttered. "I should warn you, I can't hear the music." "Then we'll create our own rhythm," Gabriel replied, leading her onto the dance floor with confident grace. Dancing with Gabriel felt like floating. His strong arms guided her movements with gentle pressure, his body providing the rhythm her ears couldn't detect. Emma found herself following his lead instinctively, trusting him completely as they moved together in perfect synchronization. Other couples swirled around them, but Emma only had eyes for Gabriel. The way he looked at her, with such focused intensity, such tender protectiveness, made her feel like the most precious thing in his world. "Everyone's watching us," Emma observed, noticing the curious glances and whispered conversations from other guests. "Let them watch," Gabriel replied, spinning her gracefully. "I want everyone to see how beautiful my wife is." The possessive pride in his voice made Emma's cheeks flush. When had she stopped being his convenient arrangement and become his wife in truth? As the song reached its crescendo, Gabriel lifted their joined hands and signed "I love you" in perfect ASL, his gray eyes never leaving her face. The gesture was clearly visible to everyone watching, a public declaration that took Emma's breath away. "You've been practicing," Emma signed back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Every day," Gabriel replied aloud, ensuring she could read his lips. "I want to speak your language." Around them, the crowd began to applaud, not just for the end of the dance, but for the obvious devotion they'd witnessed. Emma felt tears prick her eyes as she realized this wasn't performance or pretense. Gabriel Sterling, the most powerful man in the city, was proudly, publicly, genuinely in love with her. Later, as they mingled with other guests, Emma's artwork, which Gabriel had arranged to be featured in the charity auction, drew considerable attention and bidding. Watching her paintings command respect and substantial prices filled Gabriel with fierce satisfaction. Emma deserved recognition for her talent, deserved to see her dreams realized. "Your husband has been very generous in supporting emerging artists," commented art critic Jennifer Walsh, studying Emma's turbulent seascape with professional interest. "He believes in supporting dreams," Emma replied, catching Gabriel's eye across the room. He was engaged in conversation with potential investors, but his attention remained attuned to her, ready to intervene if she needed him. The evening felt magical, perfect, like a fairy tale Emma had never dared imagine for herself. She belonged here, in this glittering world, not because of Gabriel's wealth, but because of the love shining in his eyes every time he looked at her. However, as Emma excused herself to visit the powder room, she didn't notice the elegant figure watching from the shadows near the gallery entrance. Victoria Blackwood stood perfectly still, her crimson dress a slash of color against the marble walls, her green eyes fixed on Gabriel with predatory intensity. Victoria's manicured fingers tightened around her champagne flute as she watched Gabriel's obvious devotion to his new wife. The way he moved through the crowd, constantly aware of Emma's location, the tender way he guided her through conversations, the public display of sign language. It was everything Victoria had tried and failed to inspire in him during their engagement. She'd returned to the city expecting to find Gabriel still wounded, still isolated, still in need of the careful management only she could provide. Instead, she discovered him transformed, glowing with happiness that had nothing to do with her. That simply wouldn't do. Victoria set down her champagne and began moving through the crowd with purposeful grace, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Gabriel Sterling had been hers first, and she intended to remind him of that fact. The perfect evening was about to become a nightmare, and Emma's fairy tale was about to face its darkest test. Chapter 9. The Ex's Return. Monday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Gabriel sat behind his mahogany desk reviewing quarterly projections, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Emma's latest sketch, a portrait of him lost in concentration, propped nearby like a talisman against the day's challenges. The weekend had been blissful, spent in their penthouse sanctuary where the outside world couldn't intrude on their growing intimacy. Then Marcus's voice crackled through the intercom, shattering the peace. "Sir, Victoria Blackwood is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Gabriel's blood turned to ice. The quarterly reports scattered across his desk as his hands clenched involuntarily, muscle memory from their turbulent past flooding his nervous system with adrenaline. "Send her in," Gabriel said after a long pause, steel creeping into his voice. Victoria entered like a force of nature, her tailored scarlet suit a declaration of war against the muted tones of Gabriel's office. She moved with predatory grace, her emerald eyes cataloging every change in the space, particularly Emma's artwork adorning the walls where Victoria's own photograph had once resided. "Hello, darling," Victoria purred, her voice honey over broken glass. "Marriage certainly agrees with you." Gabriel remained seated, recognizing the power play for what it was. Standing would give Victoria the advantage she craved, the opportunity to invade his personal space and trigger the synesthetic responses she knew so well. "Victoria," Gabriel's acknowledgement was arctic. "What do you want?" "Straight to business, as always," Victoria laughed, settling into the chair across from his desk with feline elegance. "I've missed that about you, among other things." Gabriel's jaw tightened. You have 30 seconds. Oh, Gabriel, you always were dramatic. Victoria crossed her legs slowly, deliberately. I'm here because I'm concerned about you. This sudden marriage, this girl you've attached yourself to, it's so unlike you. Emma is my wife, Gabriel said carefully, each word precisely articulated. Emma is a project, Victoria corrected with surgical precision. A charity case you've convinced yourself you love because she doesn't trigger your little condition. The casual cruelty in Victoria's voice, reducing his synesthetic hell to a little condition, reminded Gabriel exactly why their relationship had imploded. Victoria had never understood that his hypersensitivity wasn't a quirk to be managed, but a fundamental part of who he was. Furthermore, Victoria continued, opening her designer handbag with theatrical precision, I've done some research on your bride. Gabriel's blood chilled as Victoria produced a manila folder, spreading its contents across his desk like tarot cards revealing an unwanted future. Financial records, employment history, medical bills, even photographs of Emma's cramped apartment. An entire dossier of desperation laid bare. Touching, really, Victoria said, her tone dripping false sympathy. 3 jobs, dying grandmother, crushing debt. No wonder she jumped at your proposal. Tell me, Gabriel, how does it feel knowing your wife married you for money? Get out. Gabriel's voice was deadly quiet. Not yet, darling. Victoria leaned forward, her perfume, the same intoxicating scent that had once driven him wild, filling the space between them. You see, I have a proposition. Divorce the little gold digger, and I'll keep your medical records private. Gabriel went very still. What medical records? Victoria's smile was a masterpiece of malice. The ones documenting your episodes. The hospitalization after our engagement party when you collapsed from sensory overload. The psychiatric evaluations, the medication trials, all those pesky details about your mental instability. The threat hit Gabriel like a physical blow. If Victoria released his medical information, the board would have grounds to question his fitness to lead Sterling Industries. Stockholders would panic. His empire could crumble overnight. You're bluffing, Gabriel said, though uncertainty crept into his voice. Am I? Victoria produced her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be scanned medical documents. I kept copies of everything, darling. Insurance against future complications. Gabriel's mind raced through possibilities, legal remedies, damage control strategies. But Victoria had always been thorough, always 3 steps ahead in their psychological chess matches. What do you want? Gabriel asked finally. You, Victoria said simply. Back where you belong. Marry me, Gabriel. We'll announce it as a romantic reconciliation. Blame your current marriage on temporary insanity brought on by stress. The media will eat it up. And if I refuse? Victoria's laugh was crystalline and cold. Then your precious Emma will discover exactly how thoroughly you researched her desperation before proposing. Every debt, every struggle, every humiliating detail of her poverty, all carefully cataloged like a business acquisition. Gabriel's hands shook slightly as the full scope of Victoria's manipulation became clear. She hadn't just investigated Emma's finances. She'd weaponized Gabriel's own due diligence against him. Choose carefully, darling, Victoria said, rising gracefully. Your empire or your charity case. You have until Friday to decide. As Victoria glided toward the door, she paused for one final thrust. Oh, and Gabriel? You might want to ask yourself why Emma's touch doesn't trigger your synesthesia. Perhaps it's not love. Perhaps it's simply that she feels nothing genuine for you to sense. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid sealing shut. Gabriel sat in the sudden silence, Victoria's words echoing through his mind like poison. Was Emma's calming effect real, or was it simply the absence of authentic emotion? Had he built his happiness on the foundation of an elaborate performance? Outside his windows, storm clouds gathered over the city, mirroring the tempest brewing in Gabriel's heart. Chapter 10. The Betrayal Revealed. Emma hummed softly as she arranged fresh flowers in the penthouse's main living area, a rare indulgence Gabriel had surprised her with that morning. White orchids and pale roses filled crystal vases, their delicate beauty transforming the minimalist space into something warmer, more welcoming. She'd been planning to show Gabriel her latest painting when he returned from the office, a portrait of their hands intertwined, capturing the peace they brought each other. The sound of Gabriel's keycard at the elevator made her heart skip with anticipation. These moments of reunion had become precious to her, watching his corporate armor fall away the instant he saw her, feeling the tension leave his shoulders when she touched him. But when Gabriel emerged from the elevator, something was wrong. His face was a mask of careful neutrality, his posture rigid with suppressed emotion. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. Loosened tie, rumpled jacket, hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Gabriel?" Emma approached cautiously, her artist's intuition picking up the subtle signs of distress. "What happened?" "We need to talk," Gabriel said, his voice devoid of the warmth she'd grown accustomed to. He moved past her toward his home office, maintaining careful distance that felt like a slap. Emma followed, confusion and growing dread tangling in her stomach. Gabriel's office was typically pristine, but now papers were scattered across his desk in chaotic disarray. Financial documents, employment records, medical bills, all bearing her name. "What is this?" Emma whispered, recognition dawning with sickening clarity. "Due diligence," Gabriel said flatly, not meeting her eyes. "Standard background investigation before entering any business arrangement." Emma's hands shook as she picked up the top document, a detailed analysis of her financial desperation, complete with projections of how long she could survive before facing homelessness. Every humiliating detail of her poverty was laid bare in clinical language that reduced her struggles to data points. "You investigated me," Emma said, her voice barely audible, "before you proposed." "Of course," Gabriel replied, his tone businesslike and cold. "Sterling Industries doesn't enter contracts without thorough research." The casual cruelty of his words hit Emma like physical blows. Every kindness he'd shown her, every gentle gesture, every moment of seeming tenderness, all of it had been calculated manipulation based on her documented desperation. "Was any of it real?" Emma asked, tears threatening to spill. "The studio, the gala, the way you looked at me, was it all just an investment strategy?" Gabriel's silence was answer enough. Emma's vision blurred as the magnitude of her self-deception became clear. She'd allowed herself to believe in fairy tales, to imagine that someone like Gabriel Sterling could genuinely love someone like her. Instead, she'd been a carefully selected acquisition, chosen specifically for her vulnerability and lack of options. "You knew exactly how desperate I was," Emma continued, her voice gaining strength as anger replaced heartbreak. "You knew I'd accept any offer that could save my grandmother. You calculated my breaking point like a stock portfolio." "It was a mutually beneficial arrangement," Gabriel said, his words sounding hollow even to himself. "You got what you needed." "What I needed?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "I needed someone to care about me, not catalog my desperation for future exploitation. I needed love, not a business transaction dressed up as romance." Gabriel finally looked at her, and Emma saw something flicker in his gray eyes. Pain, regret, maybe even genuine emotion. But it was too little, too late. "Did you ever care about me at all?" Emma asked. "Or was I just the most convenient solution to your touch sensitivity?" Gabriel's hesitation before answering told Emma everything she needed to know. "I thought so," Emma said quietly. She pulled the platinum wedding band from her finger, setting it carefully on Gabriel's desk beside the damning financial documents. "Thank you for the education, Mr. Sterling. I've learned more about business than I ever wanted to know." "Emma, wait!" But Emma was already walking away, her dignity intact despite her shattered heart. She paused at the office doorway, not turning around. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "my feelings were real. All of them. I hope that was worth something in your analysis." Gabriel sat frozen as Emma's footsteps receded, the elevator doors closing with mechanical finality. The penthouse felt suddenly cavernous, empty in ways that had nothing to do with square footage. Her absence created a void that his synesthetic sensitivity immediately filled with overwhelming sensation. Every emotion he'd been suppressing crashed over him like a tsunami. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to protect himself from Victoria's threats, he'd destroyed the one genuine thing in his life. Emma's touch had been his sanctuary not because she felt nothing for him, but because her love had been pure, untainted by agenda or manipulation. Now that love was gone, and Gabriel was left alone with the devastating knowledge that he'd thrown away his salvation to protect an empire that felt meaningless without her to share it. The platinum wedding band caught the light from his desk lamp, winking at him like an accusation. Gabriel Sterling had everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. Outside the penthouse windows, the storm finally broke, rain lashing against the glass like tears from a weeping sky. Chapter 11. Rock Bottom Realization. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream of regret and self-recrimination. Gabriel's penthouse, once a sanctuary of minimalist perfection, had devolved into a monument to his self-destruction. Empty coffee cups littered expensive surfaces, curtains remained drawn against the judgment of daylight, and Emma's artwork, those precious sketches that had brought life to his sterile world, lay scattered on the floor where he'd swept them in a moment of anguished fury. Gabriel himself was a shadow of the commanding CEO who had once controlled boardrooms with a glance. Stubble darkened his jaw, his hair hung unkempt, and designer suits lay wrinkled and abandoned while he survived in old college t-shirts that smelled of desperation and regret. Without Emma's calming presence, his synesthetic hypersensitivity had returned with vicious intensity. Every sound became a knife edge against his consciousness. Every accidental touch from delivery personnel or concerned staff felt like being flayed alive. The medication that had once taken the edge off his condition now seemed powerless against the overwhelming assault of sensation. Marcus had stopped visiting after Gabriel's explosive reaction to a simple wellness check had left the loyal assistant nursing bruised feelings and genuine concern for his employer's mental state. The board had begun making inquiries about Gabriel's fitness to lead, whispers of intervention and medical leave circulating through Sterling Industries like poison. Gabriel's phone buzzed insistently on the coffee table, Victoria's name flashing on the screen for the dozenth time that day. She'd been calling regularly since Emma's departure, her voice messages a sickening mixture of false sympathy and predatory satisfaction. "Darling, you sound terrible." Her latest message purred. "I know this has been difficult, but it's for the best. That girl was never right for you. Let me take care of you like I always did." Gabriel deleted the message without listening to the end. Victoria's return felt like salt in wounds that were already infected with self-loathing. She'd orchestrated this destruction with surgical precision, knowing exactly which emotional triggers would cause him to sabotage his own happiness. But as Gabriel sat in his darkened living room surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully controlled life, a terrible clarity began to emerge from the chaos. Emma's love hadn't been calculated or conditional. Her touch had calmed him not because she felt nothing, but because she'd felt everything. Love, acceptance, genuine care for the broken man beneath the billionaire facade. She'd seen his scars and chosen to stay. Chosen to learn his language, chosen to build a home in the spaces between his damaged neurons. Furthermore, Gabriel realized with devastating certainty that he'd destroyed the most authentic thing in his life to protect an empire built on isolation and fear. The prescription bottle on his coffee table mocked him with its promise of artificial peace. Gabriel picked it up, studying the chemical formula that had been his crutch for years. Then, with deliberate precision, he walked to the bathroom and poured the pills down the drain. If he was going to feel everything, he would feel it fully. No more chemical buffers, no more emotional anesthesia. Emma had taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the foundation of genuine connection. Gabriel's reflection in the bathroom mirror revealed a stranger, hollow-eyed, broken, but somehow more real than the polished executive who had worn his face for years. This man could love, could fail, could hurt and heal and choose courage over comfort. This man could fight for what mattered. Gabriel reached for his phone with hands that shook only slightly, not to call Victoria, not to accept her toxic rescue. Instead, he scrolled to his contacts until he found the number for his publicity team. "Schedule a press conference," Gabriel said when his communications director answered. "Full media availability. I have something important to announce." "Sir, are you certain? Given the recent circumstances?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Gabriel interrupted. "And make sure Emma Chen receives an invitation. Whatever it takes to get her there." As Gabriel ended the call, something resembling hope flickered in his chest for the first time in weeks. He couldn't undo the damage he'd caused, couldn't erase the pain he'd inflicted on the woman he loved. But he could stop hiding, stop protecting an image that had cost him everything real and valuable. Gabriel Sterling was about to do something his synesthetic condition had made impossible for 23 years. He was going to make himself completely, vulnerably, publicly exposed. For Emma, he would risk everything, including his carefully guarded secret and the empire built around it. Love, Gabriel realized, wasn't about finding someone who didn't trigger your pain. Love was about choosing someone worth bearing any amount of pain for. And Emma Chen was worth everything. Chapter 12. The Reunion New Beginning. The Sterling Industries conference room buzzed with anticipation as journalists, camera crews, and industry analysts filled every available seat. Gabriel's sudden announcement of a personal statement had set the financial world ablaze with speculation. Stock prices fluctuated wildly as investors wondered if the reclusive CEO was about to announce his resignation, a hostile takeover, or another bombshell that would reshape the corporate landscape. Emma sat in the back row, her heart hammering against her ribs with such force she worried the sound might be audible to those around her. Marcus had personally delivered the invitation, his usually composed demeanor cracking as he'd begged her to attend. "He's been destroyed since you left," Marcus had confessed, his loyalty to Gabriel overriding professional discretion. "Whatever happened between you, he needs you there." Now, watching Gabriel emerge from the side entrance, Emma's breath caught in her throat. Gone was the polished executive she'd married. This man was raw, vulnerable, his dark hair slightly mussed and his gray eyes bearing the weight of recent suffering. Yet somehow, he looked more real than she'd ever seen him, more human, more touchable, more heartbreakingly beautiful in his obvious pain. Gabriel approached the podium with steady steps, though Emma noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted the microphone. When his gaze swept the room, their eyes met across the crowded space, and Emma felt the familiar jolt of connection that distance and hurt hadn't managed to diminish. "Thank you all for coming," Gabriel began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "What I have to share today is deeply personal, but I believe transparency is essential for genuine leadership." Emma leaned forward in her seat, her artist's trained eye cataloging the subtle signs of Gabriel's emotional state. The tension in his shoulders, the careful control of his breathing, the way his fingers gripped the podium's edges. "For 23 years, Gabriel continued, I've lived with a neurological condition called synesthetic empathy. Every emotion from people around me manifests as physical sensation. Fear feels like acid, anger burns like fire, sadness tastes of copper and salt." A murmur rippled through the audience. Financial reporters exchanged glances, already calculating how this revelation would impact Sterling Industries' stock price and Gabriel's fitness to lead. "I've hidden this condition because I believed vulnerability was weakness," Gabriel said, his voice gaining strength. "I built walls, maintained distance, created a corporate persona designed to minimize human contact. I thought control was protection. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she watched Gabriel deliberately, courageously, exposing the secret that had shaped his entire adult life. 3 months ago, Gabriel continued, his gaze finding Emma's across the room, I met someone who changed everything. Emma Chen showed me that love isn't about finding someone who doesn't trigger your pain. Love is about finding someone worth bearing any pain for. Emma's hand flew to her throat, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. I married Emma under false pretenses, Gabriel confessed, his voice rough with emotion. I told myself it was a business arrangement, convinced myself I was protecting us both by maintaining distance. The truth is, I was terrified of the depth of what I felt for her. Gabriel's hands left the podium, and Emma watched in amazement as he began to sign while speaking, his ASL fluid and confident despite the high-pressure setting. I love you, Emma, Gabriel said and signed simultaneously. Not because your touch doesn't hurt, but because your love makes every sensation worth feeling. I love your courage, your talent, your compassion, the way you see beauty in broken things and choose to make them whole. Emma was openly crying now, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling in the face of Gabriel's public vulnerability. I investigated your background before proposing, Gabriel admitted, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. It was thorough, invasive, and wrong. But Emma, if you're listening, what that investigation couldn't measure was your heart. It couldn't quantify your kindness, your strength, or the way you transformed my world simply by existing in it. Gabriel paused, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. I'm here to announce that Gabriel Sterling, the invulnerable CEO, was a fiction. The real Gabriel Sterling is flawed, complicated, desperately in love with his wife, and willing to risk everything to earn her forgiveness. The room erupted in chaos as reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the full implications of Gabriel's confession began to sink in. But Emma heard none of it. She was already moving, pushing through the crowd with single-minded determination. Gabriel stepped away from the podium as Emma reached the front of the room. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the space that had divided them for 3 agonizing weeks. You didn't have to do that, Emma said, her voice barely audible above the commotion. Yes, I did, Gabriel replied. I'm tired of hiding, tired of protecting an image that cost me everything real. Emma closed the distance between them, her hands reaching for his face with the same gentle confidence she'd shown that first night in the art gallery. Gabriel's eyes closed at her touch, his entire body relaxing as the familiar peace washed over him. I'm sorry, Emma whispered. I should have trusted what we had instead of running when it got complicated. I'm the one who's sorry, Gabriel said, his hands covering hers. I let fear make me cruel. I let someone else's poison infect what we built together. Gabriel, Emma began, but he shook his head. Marry me, Gabriel said, his voice rough with emotion. Not for business, not for convenience. Marry me because I love you beyond reason, beyond sanity, beyond any definition of love I thought I understood. Emma's answer came in the form of a kiss, soft, sweet, filled with forgiveness and promise and the kind of love that survives even the worst storms. Around them, the chaos of the press conference continued, but Gabriel and Emma existed in their own bubble of perfect silence. When they finally broke apart, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. What happens now? Emma asked. Gabriel's smile was the first genuine expression of joy Emma had seen from him in weeks. Now we go home. We plan a real wedding with vows we write ourselves, and we build a life based on truth instead of fear. And if the board tries to remove you, then we'll face it together, Gabriel said simply. I'd rather be unemployed and honest than successful and hollow. Emma's laugh was watery with tears and bright with hope. I love you, Gabriel Sterling. All of you, the broken parts, the healing parts, the parts still learning how to be brave. Even the synesthetic, overly emotional, chronically touch-sensitive parts? Gabriel asked with a self-deprecating smile. Especially those parts, Emma said firmly. They're what make you you. As they left the conference room hand in hand, Gabriel felt the familiar assault of external emotions from the crowd. Curiosity, concern, speculation, excitement. But instead of overwhelming him, the sensations felt manageable, filtered through the lens of Emma's love and his own newfound courage. Behind them, reporters continued their frenzied coverage of the story that would dominate business news for weeks to come. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, challenges, and the complex work of rebuilding trust and planning a future together. But for the first time in his life, Gabriel Sterling wasn't afraid of what he might feel. With Emma's hand in his, he was ready to feel everything: the joy, the pain, the messy complexity of loving someone completely and being loved in return. 6 months later, they would exchange vows in the same art gallery where they first met, Gabriel's words spoken aloud while Emma's were signed, their love language a beautiful fusion of sound silence. Emma's paintings would hang on the walls around them, no longer hidden in studios but displayed for the world to see, just as Gabriel no longer hid his true self behind corporate armor. Sterling Industries would weather the storm of Gabriel's revelation, stockholders ultimately rallying behind a CEO brave enough to lead with authentic vulnerability. Victoria would fade into irrelevance, her manipulations powerless against the unshakable foundation of genuine love. But all of that was still to come. For now, Gabriel and Emma had this moment, walking together into an uncertain but hope-filled future, their love stronger for having survived its greatest test. In the end, they had learned that the most precious things in life aren't found in safety or control, but in the courage to be completely, vulnerably, authentically yourself with another. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that person will choose to love all of you, especially the parts you thought were too broken to deserve love at all. End.